To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, go to gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. When Obamacare was passed in 2010, it inspired a massive redesign of the US healthcare system. It changed almost everything, from the number of insured patients to how medical staff provides care to how the insurance industry processes claims. All of these different industries had someone representing their interests during the legislative debate over the act. And it was interest groups that played a key role in influencing policymakers, challenging the act in courts, and keeping the public informed about the changes. Whether we're talking about healthcare or fracking or civil rights, interest groups are a vital part of democracy. They offer a way for citizens to mobilize and have their voices heard by the government. Or at least, that's how they were intended to work. With the growing influence of money in politics, many interest groups reflect business interests more than the wants and needs of everyday people. In a representative democracy, our power comes from being heard by our representatives. But it's difficult to access that power without being well organized. Hi, I'm Chris Vasquez, and this is Study Hall, Power and Politics in US Government. The definition of interest groups is pretty fluid, but it generally refers to an organization that seeks to influence the government's policies or decision-making. Even their name is fluid. You might hear people referring to them as special interest groups or pressure groups, or any combination of these. There are tons of different organizations in society, like the two rivaling Queer Gamers of Pittsburgh groups that I'm a part of. But they aren't considered interest groups until they try to change government policy at some level. Interest groups can be like political parties in that they support or oppose politicians through endorsements or campaign donations. But interest groups have a narrower focus. Instead of having multiple positions on different topics, interest groups usually focus on a specific issue, like protecting gun ownership or moving towards clean energy. Some interest groups are open to anyone who wants to join, as long as you pay the membership dues, but they can also represent larger clients, like corporations. Despite these differences, interest groups all have the same goal: to influence the government on behalf of their clients. To do that on the federal level, interest groups work with all three branches of government: the executive branch, Congress, and the courts. The extent of their influence largely depends on who their clients are and how much money they have. For example, interest groups that hire lobbyists to work in Congress are mostly private businesses, like insurance companies. So lobbyists are basically the DC version of influencers. DC as in District of Columbia, not DC Comics. Interest groups do their jobs by persuading legislators to vote on certain bills that might benefit their clients. They present research on public opinions and analyze the potential consequences of each political move. And yeah, okay, they schmooze and bargain and spend a whole lot of money in the process. In just 2021, lobbyists spent around $3.7 billion, which is more than the House and Senate budgets combined. Because it costs a lot of money to push congresspeople toward your client. When private interest groups lobby the government, they seek particularized benefits, which are exclusive and benefit a narrow segment of society. Compared to public interests, which have something to do with the general public, particularized benefits include more private interests, like having fewer government regulations. And because businesses have more funds to pull from, they can spend more on lobbying. In fact, as of 2015, corporations and the like outspent public interest groups and unions by $34 for every $1. Some particularized benefits, like tax exemptions, are particularly attractive for big businesses that want to maximize their profits. For example, in 2018, the oil company BP spent $13 million to combat a policy in Washington state that would have made companies pay a fee for their carbon dioxide emissions. Regulating emissions is a major goal for many environmental interest groups, but it's in direct conflict with the profit-seeking interests of oil companies who produce those emissions. And oil companies have the money to fund private interest groups, giving them a better chance of securing the government's favor. And while businesses hold a lot of lobbying power now, that wasn't always the case. Back in the 1960s, businesses were generally pretty ineffectual in their lobbying. But when Congress started heavily regulating businesses and expanding its policymaking activities, businesses started to push back, and kept pushing. Since the majority of interest groups represent private businesses, it can seem like public interests are outnumbered. And strictly by the numbers, they are. But that doesn't always mean they lose. In 2005, a gas and oil company called TransCanada proposed a massive pipeline that would transport oil from Canadian oil sands down to Texas. The Keystone XL pipeline would move more than 800,000 barrels a day. For reference, jumping over that many barrels while playing Donkey Kong would get you a world record. Or maybe it wouldn't, I don't play Donkey Kong. That's more oil than we import from Russia. And energy independence is generally thought of as a good thing. But the plan ignited protests throughout local indigenous communities concerned with the potential environmental effects. This threat to their land and clean water echoed the US government's long history of choosing profit over indigenous rights. Environmental activist groups also opposed the pipeline, as it would continue our reliance on dirty energy instead of cleaner options. These groups went up against massive oil corporations and their even bigger wallets while protesting the pipeline. In a roughly decade-long battle, they were able to capitalize on passionate public advocacy, widespread public support, and political timing in order to win their underdog fight. Climate activists held protests, practiced civil disobedience, and in 2014, hundreds of people were arrested outside the White House. Indigenous tribes, as well as farmers and ranchers, filed lawsuits against the pipeline. So on the first day President Biden was in office in 2021, he signed an executive order that revoked the Keystone XL permit, showing how public interest groups still retain political power and influence, even in the face of wealthy private interests. Because public interests have to do with society's health and well-being, they're vital to our democracy. By extension, so are the groups that represent those interests. Overall, interest groups help both people and corporations engage in governance and advocate for their public or private interests. But there has to be a reason why so many of the interest groups active in Washington are businesses or professional associations. It's partly because it's easier for rich people to chip in money for lobbying compared to hourly workers with 2 jobs and a side hustle. When it comes to organizing, it's easier for people to unite in small groups instead of large groups. Smaller groups allow people to pool their resources like time and money with others, like if they want to pay a lobbyist to represent their interests to the government. That way, they're sharing the financial burden. And because the groups are smaller, they can monitor each other to make sure they're all contributing fairly. But another reason why a lot of interest groups are businesses has to do with the kinds of services or benefits they want to get from the government. Many organizations are after private goods, like government contracts. Private goods are essentially enjoyed by a select group of people who paid into them. And that's different from public goods, which you can use without taking away someone else's access, like clean air. But because of their accessibility, it's harder for advocacy to happen. Everyone can enjoy public goods, so individual people aren't incentivized to contribute their own money and time to help make sure they stick around. This phenomenon of some people enjoying benefits without helping to bear the cost is called the free rider problem. Free riding becomes an issue when public goods start to degrade because no one is contributing time or money to their maintenance. For example, we use public parks to relax, walk our dogs, or let our kids run free for a few hours. We don't pay for the upkeep of parks directly, but part of our taxes fund our city's Parks and Recreation department, which is the inspiration for a long-running NBC sitcom. Oh, and they oversee park maintenance. If too many of us skipped paying our taxes, our parks would become unusable, and so taxes can help avoid some issues with the free rider problem. But often, interest groups don't care about the free rider problem, as long as they can help their community. Free riders don't necessarily prevent mobilization or action, like how in 2010 in Detroit, the city stopped maintaining many of their parks due to budget cuts. So a group of concerned volunteers decided to take mowing the parks into their own hands, until the city found the money to do the maintenance themselves. Public interest groups exist in many forms, and they incentivize members in ways that are different from private interest groups, like through the selective benefits they offer specifically to their members, which can take 3 forms. First, purposive benefits. These aren't benefits enjoyed by porpoises, but rather benefits that are more personal and value-driven, like the incentives that people gain from advocating for causes that they believe in. Like, if you were a member of the Sierra Club, one of your purposive benefits might be knowing that you're involved in the protection of the environment. Then there's material benefits. These are the physical benefits you get from joining an interest group, like how the AARP offers its members special pricing and discounts on hotels or insurance. The incentive of saving money in the long run might persuade people to join the group. And lastly, there's solidary benefits. These incentives come from when you join a group of people that have similar values as you. The NAACP is a great example of this. People are motivated to join because it offers connections with others that have shared experiences and goals related to civil rights. Groups that advocate for public interest draw people in with their selective benefits. But when it comes to lobbying and having an influential role in policymaking, these groups can struggle with their private competition because they're usually less well-funded. When members of the public are motivated by interest groups to target their elected officials, whether through protests, letters, or billboards, it's called outside lobbying. Outside lobbying differs from traditional insider lobbying, aka people in suits meeting in swanky restaurants offering campaign donations to persuade politicians to vote a certain way on a bill. But that doesn't mean outside lobbying doesn't have a chance. It involves getting a politician's constituents to change their vote or opinion on an issue. Interest groups use public support to energize public advocacy, like with the Keystone XL pipeline or the Detroit Park example. Outside lobbying is one of the ways in which public interest groups can even the playing field with private groups. It's difficult for the public to sympathize with corporations and their interests, but it might be easier to rally a crowd over concerns of civil rights or the protection of the environment. Interest groups enable us to join a cause and make our voices heard by the people in government. But sometimes, the voice they offer individuals isn't as loud as the voice they offer pharmaceutical companies. Because in general, interest groups don't represent society very well. Groups like those experiencing homelessness, unemployed people, and undocumented immigrants continue to be unrepresented. This leaves a lot of people out of the policy conversation, and it takes away their right to impactful representation. The US is a representative democracy, and we find our power in advocacy. Concentrating that power into a collective voice can help to strengthen our ability to have a say in government. The win over the Keystone XL pipeline signified a moment where collective power triumphed over multi-billion-dollar corporations, highlighting the influence of indigenous and environmental activism, and the success of public interest groups. But it's just one example of that success, and it can be done again, through the power of collective action. If you're enjoying Study Hall Power and Politics in US Government and are interested in taking an online course and earning college credit, go to gostudyhall.com, or click on the button to learn more. Thanks for watching. See you next time.